The Nintendo Game Boy has finally reached its 30th anniversary. It is an important console, not only paving the way for the Nintendo Switch, but also showing the competition that you can't win with hardware alone. Let's take a look at the Nintendo Game Boy and how it is an important system 30 years later. Let's get started. The Game Boy was not the first handheld device released by Nintendo. Prior to the Game Boy was the Game & Watch line. These handhelds were very simple and had basic games. There were a total of 60 handhelds released in the series from 1980 to 1991. There were so many types of Game & Watches, such as the dual-screen port of Donkey Kong from the arcade, which is an ancient version of the Nintendo DS, and original games like Fire or Manhole. The only major problem with the Game & Watch is that if you wanted a new game, you had to buy a totally new console. This was obvious because the Game & Watch was based off a calculator and did not have a pixel-based screen, meaning that the same pictures would be displayed at the exact same places each time. This was also expensive for most people, so most people bought just one system. 9 years later, in 1989, the Nintendo Game Boy released. It combined features from both the NES and the Game & Watch. Now you can finally have multiple games with multi-changeable cartridges. The Game Boy is a bulky system compared to the Game & Watch, most notably because of the advanced components. It has a dot matrix green-tinted screen with a 160 by 144 resolution, which uses 4 shades of green to create images. Since the Game Boy only had 4 shades of green, the sprites had to be designed in a way that they could not blend with everything else on screen. There were also issues with the sprites becoming smeared and blurry, especially with dealing with platformers. This was called ghosting, and was definitely annoying when you're trying to play games that were pretty fast. The Game Boy also dealt with non-backlit screen, making it quite annoying to play at night. It also uses 4 AA batteries and has a headphone jack right on the bottom with stereo sound. The buttons of the Game Boy are very mushy and the D-pad feels really good. The Game Boy has a volume slider, a contrast slider to try and get the best picture, an accessory port, and a power switch at the top. Since the Game Boy was so successful, Sega decided to create their own handheld to compete with Nintendo. This system was the Game Gear and was marketed to be more superior to the Game Boy. It had a backlit screen, a full color display. It also had better sound capabilities. However, the Game Gear was too ahead of its time, meaning that there was a lot of batteries, as it needed a lot of power, it was bulky, and the screen just didn't look that good. And honestly, it was more expensive, so people just bought the cheaper console with the better games. And that's why the Game Boy sold more units. The Game Boy had 1,047 licensed games released during its lifetime. There were Game Boy Color games as well that were also compatible with the original Game Boy, which were cased with black plastic to distinguish the difference. The game library was the main reason that the Game Boy sold more units compared to the Game Gear. The Game Boy launched with 5 games: Baseball, Tennis, Alleyway, Super Mario Land, and Tetris. Tetris was the Game Boy system seller, which attracted adults and children alike due to how addictive and fun it was. After the launch titles of the Game Boy, there were so many more Nintendo and third-party games. So why don't we take a look at some of my favorite titles and some of the important titles that define the Game Boy, starting with the Super Mario Land series. Super Mario Land was one of the launch titles, and it was a little simple, but overall the gameplay in this game is fantastic. Great enemies, great locations, and it's very an original game, though the sprites are a little small. Super Mario Land 2 improved on everything that the original did, and all it did was pretty much make the sprites larger. It added an overworld map, and it introduced a bunch of really really cool new places to go to, which makes this game really unique. It's one of the best Mario platforms just because of how original it is, and it has all of these really cool new power-ups introduced as well. But overall, this is a fantastic title. Super Mario Land 3 is not actually a Mario game at all. In fact, you play as Wario in this game. This game has no gameplay that's similar to any Mario game, and this was the first Wario Land game because the Virtual Boy one came out after. So in this game, it's kind of slow sometimes. You will feel like it's not as fast as Super Mario is, but the storyline is definitely carried over from the last game. The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening is such a fantastic game. It's full with exploration, discovery, and has pretty good graphics for the Game Boy at the time. And it's kind of similar in the way that it plays to A Link to the Past, so it's pretty cool in that sense. But overall, it's a fantastic game, and I'm really excited for the remake on the Nintendo Switch. Like Donkey Kong Country on the Super Nintendo, Rare created a trilogy for the Game Boy. They used a similar graphic style using pre-rendered graphics, but they tried to take advantage of the Game Boy and with the limited hardware they have. Obviously, it doesn't look amazing, and I find it sometimes hard to see, but these are 3 great games, honestly. I like the first one personally. I think it's a lot more simpler, but definitely check them out if you're interested in Donkey Kong Country. Donkey Kong on the Game Boy is, in my opinion, the best sequel to the original Donkey Kong. It takes that game and adds a whole bunch of new elements to make it a great puzzle game. You have a whole bunch of different levels, and overall, it's really good game. The puzzles are also sometimes difficult too, but it brings some different mechanics from games like Super Mario Bros. 2 and just Super Mario Bros. In general. Overall, fantastic game, definitely check it out. The Kirby franchise also originates from the Game Boy. These are 2 great games, Kirby's Dream Land and Kirby's Dream Land 2. The sequel, Kirby's Dream Land 2, though, in my opinion, takes the first game to a whole new level and also introduces Kirby's mainstay ability, which is his copy ability. So that's really good. I also like the Animal Buddy, so those are pretty fun as well. This is a great game, and if you play it on the Super Game Boy, it will also have a whole bunch of colors integrated. So this is a great title, so definitely check it out. Metroid also got a sequel on the Game Boy. In this game, they basically took the original NES game and they tried to change as much about it. This game is very different, has a bunch of new features to the Metroid franchise, and it looks way better to the NES version in my opinion because it's not as grid-based, meaning that the environment looks a little cooler. So I like this game, definitely check it out if you haven't, because this game was remade on the Nintendo 3DS as well. Nintendo also ported a lot of cool puzzle games from the NES, such as Dr. Mario. This is a fantastic port, works pretty much identically. They had to use some dithering with the display to try and get multiple colors, because as you notice, Dr. Mario uses 3 colors for the pills, so they had to try to get a second color by just combining the 2. So that's pretty cool. Overall, it's a fantastic port, so definitely check this one out as well, if you're a fan of Dr. Mario. F1 Race was one of the best racing games on the Game Boy. The reason is that it was used to show off the 4-player adapter with multiplayer and multiple Game Boys. This was a fantastic game back then. Now, of course, it might not be a great game today, but I would say that's an important game that defined what the Game Boy is, because it really was introduced a new accessory that it would come bundled with in this long box, and it would have the 4-player adapter, but you'd also need other link cables to hook up to it, so it's pretty cool. And for our last game, let's take a look at Pokemon. This was a huge franchise, and it still is. It came from their Game Boy, just the same as Kirby did. This game was really popular, and it still is a great game. It was remade with Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. Personally, I like this one better, but overall, great gameplay. A lot of cool places to explore. There were 3 versions of the game. The red and blue were the ones that people mostly got. The big deal with these games were the point that you could use the Game Boy Link cable, hook 2 Game Boys together, and you could trade Pokemon, and each different version of Pokemon would have their own Pokemon, meaning that you'd have to get a link cable between your friend's Game Boy and trade for the ones they didn't have. The basic goal is to try to complete your Pokédex. The original Pokemon games are great, and if you still haven't played them, make sure to pick them up. Overall, the Game Boy had a fantastic game library, and I'm hoping to see a classic edition of the Game Boy, or even yet just a Nintendo Switch Online app so I can play these games on the go. We already went over the 4-player adapter with F1 Race and the Game Boy link cable with Pokemon. So let's take a look at more accessories, starting with the Game Boy printer and camera. The Game Boy camera was a really cool product to own in 1998, as it gave people the ability to take photos and edit them in all kinds of ways. It was basically like today's mobile devices and applications, but on one game cartridge with a camera at the top. Although the resolution and picture may not look good today, it is still a really cool accessory. But it gets better, as you can print your creations using the Game Boy link cable and the Game Boy printer. The printer works with thermal heat, meaning there is no ink required. That way you can take as many pictures as you want. You only just need 6 AA batteries. The Game Boy is a big pop culture and video game icon. Many people will instantly recognize it. There is new Game Boy merchandise today also, such as keychains and backpacks. You can even play Game Boy games on emulators as well. Characters and franchises such as Kirby, Wario, and Daisy would also originate from the Game Boy and would also appear in a lot of games. As time would go on, Nintendo would continue to improve and evolve the Game Boy into the Nintendo DS, 3DS, and the current Nintendo Switch today. Although the Nintendo Switch surely does borrow its hardware and functionality from other consoles, we all know that the Nintendo Game Boy started it all. Anyway guys, that brings us to the end of the video. If you did enjoy it, make sure to leave a like, and also don't forget to hit the subscribe button to see future videos on the channel. And I will catch you guys next time. Goodbye.